keep on through automatic action, being one with those tendencies, then that thing becomes fixed within us. For instance, if you give way to anger, after a while, it becomes a natural thing for you. And your temper is something to avoid, and you enjoy, as they say, as a matter of principle, being mad at everybody. Or perhaps you enjoy ill health. Why? Because you're accustomed to do it, that's all. We should remember that. And so habit does govern our lives. And we must realize that if we entertain these things, then they become fixed. A fixed tendency, and it's very difficult to break it. I have a little story about habit. It's quite a nice little story. I can remember it. There was a woman, autoist, who was passing through some of the ruins in Greece, and there were a lot of these pillars that had fallen over, and so she wanted her picture taken by those pillars. And so this party was taking the picture. This shows the power of habit. And this party was taking the picture, and she said, don't get the automobile into this picture, or my husband will think I ran into the place. So that's the power of habit. She was so used to, blaming her husband for everything. So he got blamed for the ruins in Greece. So we have to realize that the power of habit is tremendous. So the next time you take a picture, don't get the automobile in it, especially if it's destruction. Now, bad habits. Bad habits, people who yield to bad habits are so accustomed to them that they cannot get out of their predicament. This is a very important little point I'd like to bring to you. They're so accustomed to it that they cannot get out of the predicament, and therefore they cannot compare the lasting or good results as against these temporary results of worldly things. That's a very important thing. Like if you have a car and you think it's a wonderful automobile, but you ride in some of the newer ones, and then you can compare. And so those who follow bad habits are denied the privilege of comparing the peace and bliss which comes like following a good habit of meditation. So realize that if you follow bad habits, you don't know what the good habits are like. How can you judge until you sit down and meditate and make God contact? Then you'll know whether meditation is a good or bad habit. And that's what the bad habits do. They deprive us of that ability to compare, or that privilege, rather, of comparing the good habits with the bad habits. Now, those who follow good habits, naturally, although in the beginning they do not perhaps give the glamour of following the bad habits, but in the end they give lasting peace and harmony and bliss and joy. So we must compare the habits to understand them and realize the marked difference between the bad and good habits. And so Master has this to say. I'd like to read it this time from one of his books. Master said about good and bad habits and about comparison. He says this: the little child thinks it's fun to play with mud pies, but when he begins to grow up, it will not satisfy him anymore. And so he says, when you grow up spiritually, you will not miss the false pleasures of the world. But unless you meditate, mix with those who meditate regularly, you will not understand that. Because the world in the beginning and its pleasures seems very alluring. But when you taste the other and finally become fixed in it, stayed in the consciousness of God, whose mind is stayed in me, as we read in Isaiah, then you understand the difference between the ordinary worldly habits and those good habits, especially of meditation. Now, guarding against bad habits, a few things to remember is this. First, bad company or bad people, if you mix with them, due to that bad habit which they have, you also invite such bad habits. On the other hand, if you mix with worldly people, now worldly people perhaps are not bad in the sense of the world, but you will become like them because they have made the habit of worldly consciousness dynamic to them. They may be good, they may be honest, but they are not religious necessarily. And that's the important thing. I've seen people mix with worldly people, good people, perhaps after they've been in the work for a while, and they change. Why? Because those worldly people are not religious people. They're not people who have made God contact and whose mind is bent on contacting God. That's why you change. And we should realize that. But those who mix with meditative people, who have meditative habits, then the result is wonderful. Because then the end is God contact. And with God contact, all things come. That's why self-realization fellowship is so wonderful. It has its faults. But those who persevere and overlook the faults and keep at it and join with those people who have meditative habits, they will feel the bliss of God, and God will cease to be just an idea. He will become a reality, because the teachings of self-realization are founded on truth, and the techniques which we are given and which we follow lead us to God contact, not just an idea about God. So it's very important to understand that it is well